Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to talk about IVF with insurance, so the cost with insurance. So we're kind of assuming that at this point, if you're watching this video, you probably already know you have insurance, but if you don't have insurance or don't really know if you have insurance, then definitely check out the previous video, well, not the previous video, but the previous video in kind of our cost sequence, and we'll link that at the end of this video as well.
So I guess step one, if you know you have fertility coverage, know what that entails. So for us, for example, our fertility coverage, it was a max lifetime amount that we got to go towards fertility. Meaning, if we would have used it for other procedures, we would essentially run out of funds to get to IVF. So the important thing is, if you do, like us, have a max allowance, to make sure that you use, your allowance wisely. Don't use up all your money on, other things if ultimately you're most likely going to end up the IVF route. Another thing you want to make sure you are aware of is sometimes your medication coverage and your medical coverage is separate. So for us, it took us a while for us to get a strict answer whether our prescriptions would be covered under that max allowance or whether it was completely separate. So when we went into IVF, we assumed that the prescription would hit our max allowance, so we ended up paying everything on our own because we were not sure and we didn't want to tap into our maximum fertility coverage. Now the reason we didn't want to do that was because if we would have used up all the money on the medication, you can't use a coupon at a doctor's office or on medical procedures, whereas with medication, you can shop around different pharmacies. There's coupons, I mentioned that in the other video. There's GoodRx and things like that you can use to lower the cost of the medication. So definitely, know whether your prescriptions will hit that max allowance. So for us, like I said, we treated it as if it would because we didn't get an answer, and we were kind of under a time crunch because we were starting that month and we didn't get an answer. And so we said, well, let's just assume that the prescriptions are going towards it, so we're just going to not use insurance to pay for that. So what we did is, you can watch our other video how we lowered the cost through coupons, shopping around, and getting quotes from different pharmacies. But the main thing I want to point out is, because if you do have insurance coverage, you want to make sure you do it wisely, because if at the end of everything either you have leftover money and let's say your max allowance is $50,000 and you only use 20 of it, then the rest of the money can be used for the medication. Or if, like for us, we ended up finding out that the prescription and the medical were separate, so our prescription cost did not hit that max allowance that we had, and so we were able to then get reimbursed and just sent in receipts to our prescription carrier and got it all reimbursed. So just make sure, like I said, that you're wise about what you do so that you use in-network pharmacies. So what I did is, again, you can refer to the other video, but I'll just give you a quick recap. So I made sure that I used an in-network pharmacy, which is important for two reasons. One, if you do want to get reimbursed, and two, it will give you a lower rate regardless whether you have prescription coverage or not, just because you're getting a negotiated rate. And then, so for instance, you have to be really smart and diligent about it and kind of keep an Excel spreadsheet. So what we did is we kind of looked at our options. So as I mentioned, you can reach out to other pharmacies, even ones that aren't part of your prescription coverage. I don't know, I can't think of the word.
They aren't in network.
Yeah, they aren't in network. So ones that aren't in network. So for us, for example, there were a couple of medications. One medication that I can think of on the top of my head is the trigger shot. So the trigger shot, we actually ended up using CVS, which was not one of our pharmacies for fertility medication. But after running all the numbers, it was kind of up in the air. It was, well, we could either pay, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was a lot higher for us to run through Freedom Fertility, which is the pharmacy that we ended up using, as opposed to going with CVS. And we said, well, at the end of the day, if we aren't able to get reimbursed, the number was high enough that we were like, let's just go with CVS, because it ended up being $100. I know it was $100 at CVS, and I know it was more at the other one. We said, well, we can stomach $100 even if we can't get reimbursed for that. So there are certain instances where you want to be smart about, you know, what you're doing. But definitely the high cost items, you know, the big ones that are over $1,000, you want to make sure that you use, you know, with an in-network, because if you can get reimbursed at the end, you know, it's kind of important. And then, like I said, we didn't get the answer whether we would get reimbursed or not until we were done with everything. So once I was pregnant, you know, it was successful transfer, that's when we finally got an answer, and they said, nope, you know, prescription does not go towards that max allowance. So what you need to do whenever you're kind of in that limbo and don't know, make sure that that you have when you have your prescriptions run through the pharmacy, have them run it through your insurance as well, even though you're going to end up backing out of it. So the reason that's important is for us, you know, we had Freedom run it with insurance, and we got that nice balance of $0 because it said our insurance would pay for it. And you're probably thinking, well, why don't we just, you know, run it through that? Like I said earlier, we weren't sure if that would go towards our max fertility coverage, and like I said, we didn't want to use all our allowance on the medication. So, but we got that $0, meaning, you know, insurance does cover it, which helped us later when we kind of had to fight back and forth in order for them to actually reimburse us. So once we got the word that it wouldn't hit our max, and once we were kind of done with, you know, our treatment, we went ahead and we sent in all our receipts. Now, insurance is not going to just up and say, oh yes, you know, we'll reimburse you, you know, $6,000. They're going to fight you for it. They kept saying no. And you really have to be on top of it. Lots of phone calls. I mean, I know Ari spent hours on the phones with them. And finally, you know, we were able to kind of go back with them, and we showed them, look, you quoted us $0 when we ran it through insurance. And we kind of explained to them the reason we didn't is because we asked whether the two were separate with the max allowance, and we couldn't get an answer, which is why we just went ahead and paid for it cash. And then at the end of the day, you know, having that proof that it was $0 allowed us to get that money back. Now, I'll kind of explain why it was $0 for us. So we did, you know, hit our, you know, max out of pocket, our deductible. So had we not hit our deductible, obviously it would have been the cost until we hit down our deductible.
So Natalie just mentioned the maximum out of pocket and the deductibles, and that's really important. And so I guess I'm more of the money person in the house, although she did do a fantastic job cutting the cost down on the meds. But typically I'm the one who makes a lot of the money decisions. And we've seen, number one, a lot of videos where people talk about, hey, this is our exact cost, or you know, for each one of the visits, this is what we paid. And that's just not a reliable number. Your particular situation is really going to be based on where you are on your spend during the year. So if you go out and you hit your deductible, you're going to be in a similar situation to us where, you know, based on whatever your plan is, you might be stuck paying 10 or 20% or 15%, again, just based on what your plan is of the actual cost. If you hit your deductible or your maximum out of pocket, well, if you hit your maximum out of pocket, you're going to pay $0, right? So for Natalie, because of all the testing that she had gone through, she had already hit her maximum out of pocket, and that's why we were at $0 for the medication. So please make sure that you pay close attention if you're watching videos or if you're reading other people's information, that you're not basing or expecting the cost to be exactly what theirs is. You know, we could go in and we could share all of the billable expenses, but that's really not going to do anything for you. So now, along with that, if you're at the very beginning of the year, you may be able to take advantage, or at the end of a year, you might be able to take advantage of the fact that you spent a lot of money, or insurance has spent a lot of money. So pay attention to your timing, and we mentioned that also in a couple of previous videos. And you can feel free also to reach out. Natalie's given her Instagram handle out on multiple occasions, and we can walk you through some of those if you run yourself into a situation where you don't know what the right steps are. Because at the end of the day, these are kind of critical decisions that you're going to make that are ultimately going to decide whether you spend, $1,500 or $6,000 or $7,000, depending on what your maximum out of pocket is. So Natalie's maximum out of pocket is, I think, $3,500. So you can kind of stomach some of those costs as you go through and go, okay, well, I know I'm going to spend $3,500. But on the medication side of it, you might be able to time it appropriately to take advantage of it and get all the meds for free rather than having to pay $3,500 as you cross on January 1st. If you order them December 31st, you can take advantage of that. So that's one of the big things. The other thing is that the promise programs don't typically apply. So at least they didn't for us. And I know a lot of the reading that we did, they don't typically apply. So when you go in and you talk to your office or your provider, make sure you understand whether there are things that they may offer, whether there are packages that are still applicable to insurance. And that's mainly because there are some things and some costs that fall outside of insurance's guidelines regardless. So even if you have insurance, you're going to have to pay for some of these things out of pocket. So I like to use the term "don't rob Peter to pay Paul." Natalie will probably tell me that's a stupid saying later. Most of my sayings are that way, but for us, genetic testing, the anesthesia and embryo freezing were not covered. And again, based on what we've seen, those don't tend to be covered by anybody's insurance. So we had to pay $4,500 out of pocket for the genetic testing, $1,500 out of pocket for the embryo freezing, and $500 for anesthesia. So you look at that number and you're going, okay, well, I'm already paying $65.50 out of pocket. Now, there's a caveat there. Don't try and skimp on some of those things, because we did a whole video on why we decided to do PGS, the type of genetic screening. For us, it was very important. For you, it might not be important. But think those decisions through, because they're really, again, they're pivotal decisions as you go in. For us, we didn't know any of this stuff really until we got down to it and started the process. So you're going to feel overwhelmed. And that's kind of why we're making these videos, to make sure that you have resources. Hopefully people find these videos and can use us as a resource, because that's our purpose here. So really, if we could kind of highlight everything, make sure you know what your coverage is. So check whether or not your prescription plan and your regular medical coverage are talking, and find out what you got. Definitely follow the meds like Natalie said. Know your deductible and your maximum out of pocket and where you stand during that cycle, I would say, your yearly cycle. And talk to your provider about what their programs are and what those things are. They're going to know what is not typically covered under insurance as well. So you can have them run everything and find out. But definitely thank you for joining, and we're going to have a video. Natalie's, I think the next video in line will probably be you talking about all your kind of steps that we think really made us successful.
Yeah, so what I did kind of during that 10-day wait from after the transfer to when I got the positive pregnancy test, because I know that was big for me when I would, read success stories. I kind of wanted to know, okay, what exactly did they do? And not saying that what I did, made it work, but I know that, if we go this route again, I'm going to do it exactly the same again. I'm not going to change anything up, but I'll share what I did.
So please let us know if you have any specific questions, or if you've got anything that any video requests or anything like that for the future. We've really tried to stay diligent with this Thursday thing and throw in a couple of them intermingled as well. So thank you everybody for joining, and until next time.